Three HOA thugs with bolt cutters just broke into my family's century-old barn at 5:47 a.m. Too bad Sheriff Hendricks was waiting inside with his morning coffee and a federal arrest warrant. 8 months ago, Delilah Wainwright was just another nosy neighbor complaining about my barn's weathered red paint. Today, she's facing federal charges for mail fraud, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy to steal land worth $2.8 million in mineral rights she never knew I owned. The metallic clang of bolt cutters biting through my padlock echoed across the frosted Colorado morning. That sharp, bitter smell of cut steel mixed with old hay and wood smoke from my chimney. Then the barn door creaked open and 3 pairs of eyes went wide as dinner plates when they saw that shiny badge gleaming in the dawn light. Pure panic. 8 months of documented harassment about to become federal prison time. What would you do if your HOA tried to frame you to steal your family's century-old property? And where are you watching from? Drop your location below. I guarantee your area has HOA horror stories that'll make this look like amateur hour. But to understand how suburban Queen Bee Delilah Wainwright became a federal defendant, we gotta start from the beginning. My name's Ezra Blackwood, and this land has been in my family since 1923. My grandfather bought these 15 acres when Colorado was still more cattle than suburbs, back when a man's handshake meant something and neighbors actually talked to each other instead of hiding behind Ring doorbells and HOA bylaws. I'm 52, recently divorced, and work as an electrician around Jefferson County. After the divorce papers got signed, I moved back to the old homestead. Seemed like the right place to start over. The original farmhouse sits on a small rise, with grandfather's weathered red barn down the slope and a little apple orchard that still produces decent fruit if you don't mind the occasional worm. Every morning I'd sit on that wraparound porch with my coffee, listening to meadowlarks singing over the distant hum of Highway 36. The rich aroma of fresh ground beans mixed with the sweet scent of apple blossoms in spring. The barn housed my woodworking shop. Turned out I had a knack for custom cabinets and furniture. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills and kept my hands busy during those long evenings when the house felt too quiet. Life was simple, peaceful even. Then the developers showed up. In 2019, some outfit called Mountain Vista Development bought up all the farmland surrounding my property. Within 18 months, they'd bulldozed 200 acres of prairie grass and slapped up a cookie-cutter subdivision they called Millbrook Estates. Identical beige houses with identical tiny yards, each one priced at $500,000 for what my grandfather would have called a chicken coop. My 15 acres sat right in the middle of it all like a stubborn island of reality in an ocean of suburban fantasy. The developers had tried to buy me out, of course. Offered me decent money, too. But this land isn't for sale. Never has been, never will be. By 2021, the new residents had formed something called the Millbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Started getting letters in my mailbox, certified letters with fancy letterhead talking about community standards and property value protection. They wanted me to join their little club, pay their fees, follow their rules. I laughed and threw the letters in my shop's burn barrel, where they crackled and turned to ash alongside wood shavings that smelled like cedar and pine. Turns out that was my first mistake. Apparently, laughing at HOA demands is like waving a red flag at a bull. That's when I met Delilah Wainwright. She showed up on a Tuesday morning in October, clip-clopping across my gravel driveway in those ridiculous high heels like she was heading to a board meeting instead of bothering a man trying to enjoy his coffee. 48 years old, blonde hair pulled back so tight it probably gave her headaches, wearing a business suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Mr. Blackwood? Her voice had that particular pitch that meant trouble, sweet as honey on the surface but with an edge that could cut glass. I'm Delilah Wainwright, president of the Millbrook Estates HOA. We need to discuss bringing your property into compliance with community standards. I set down my coffee mug and looked her over. Real estate agent, judging by the oversized business card she kept waving around. Transplant from California, based on that accent and the way she kept glancing around my property like she smelled something unpleasant. Probably the honest scent of sawdust and motor oil instead of her preferred artificial vanilla air fresheners. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice polite but firm. I appreciate you stopping by, but my property was here long before your community existed. I'm not part of your HOA, don't plan to be, and don't need to comply with anything except county code. Her smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind those blue eyes. I think you'll find that's not entirely accurate, Mr. Blackwood. Your rustic aesthetic is affecting property values. Some residents are concerned about the type of clientele your little workshop attracts. There it was. The first shot fired. 3 days later, I found the violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox. Immediate action required. Structure violates Millbrook Estates CC and Rs Section 4.2. 1B. Non-conforming agricultural buildings prohibited within residential zoning overlay. Barn demolition or architectural compliance required within 30 days. Daily fines of $150 commence immediately. Failure to comply will result in lien placement and legal action. November rolled around, and Delilah wasn't kidding about those daily fines. Every morning brought a new violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox like some kind of bureaucratic advent calendar from hell. My barn was non-conforming. My gravel driveway was unapproved surfacing material. My pickup truck parked in plain sight was commercial vehicle display in residential zone. The woman had apparently appointed herself the violation fairy because these notices kept coming faster than I could burn them. $150 a day for the barn, $75 for the driveway, $50 for truck visibility. By her math, I owed the HOA over $4,200 in fines for the crime of existing on my own property for 6 weeks. But Delilah wasn't satisfied with just paper harassment. She'd organized a social media campaign that would have made a political operative proud. The Millbrook Estates Facebook group turned into her personal war room, filled with carefully angled photos of my property that made everything look like a junkyard. Comments poured in from neighbors I'd never met, calling my barn an eyesore and my lifestyle inconsistent with community values. I started checking that Facebook group like it was a train wreck. Horrifying, but impossible to look away. One particularly charming post featured a close-up of my weathered barn door with the caption, "Is this the image we want for our $500K investment?" The smell of fresh coffee couldn't even mask the bitter taste of watching strangers trash talk 3 generations of my family's hard work. Then came the mini twist that flipped the script entirely. I was researching those violation notices online, diving into Colorado HOA law, when I decided to pull my original property deed from the county recorder's office. What I found made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. When Granddad sold off portions of his land over the decades, he'd been way smarter than I'd given him credit for. The crafty old farmer had retained mineral rights to the entire original 40-acre parcel, including every square foot that Mountain Vista Development had built on. Every single house in Millbrook Estates sat on property where my family still owned what was underneath. But here's the kicker. Those mineral rights were worth serious money. A quick search showed oil and gas lease activity in our area going for $2,000, $5,000 per acre annually. Delilah's entire subdivision was sitting on my family's gold mine. Here's the legal nugget that saved my bacon. You can research property deed restrictions and mineral rights at your county recorder's office for free. Most homeowners don't realize they might own valuable subsurface assets that HOAs can't touch. Armed with this bombshell, I scheduled a consultation with Sarah Martinez, a property rights attorney in Boulder. It cost me $300, but watching her face light up when she read my deed was priceless. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, practically bouncing in her chair, "not only do these violations have zero legal standing, but you've got leverage they don't even know exists. If they keep harassing you, we can file for vexatious litigation and damages." My counterpunch was swift and surgical. First, I installed professional-grade security cameras around the property perimeter, not just basic trail cams, but systems that uploaded everything to the cloud in real time. Then I posted a detailed legal response on the Millbrook Estates Facebook group, complete with citations from Colorado revised statutes about HOA limitations and grandfathered property rights. I included photos of my original deed with the mineral rights clearly highlighted and added this bombshell. P.S. Thanks for building your subdivision on my mineral rights. We should talk. The response was immediate chaos. Some neighbors, like Margaret Chen, a retired teacher who'd been getting tired of Delilah's power trips, and Bobby Kowalski, a veteran who lived 3 streets over, started commenting in support. But others doubled down, sharing Delilah's increasingly frantic posts about property owner responsibility and community investment protection. What really sent Delilah into overdrive was when I filed a formal harassment complaint with Jefferson County. Sheriff's Deputy Hendricks spent 3 hours at my kitchen table, documenting every violation notice, every social media post, every threatening letter. "Mr. Blackwood, this is textbook targeted harassment," Deputy Hendricks said as he closed his notebook. "Keep documenting everything. When this escalates, and it will, we'll have grounds for charges." The evening sounds around my property had changed, Instead of just meadowlarks and distant traffic, now there were electronic beeps of security systems and the occasional whir of cameras auto-focusing. My peaceful homestead was becoming a fortress, but I wasn't backing down. 3 days later, I found a new notice on my mailbox. This one wasn't about violations, it was about mandatory fire safety inspections and emergency access compliance. Delilah was escalating to phase 2. March brought more than just melting snow, it brought Delilah's next level of crazy. The woman had apparently spent her winter months plotting, because she came back swinging with the kind of bureaucratic warfare that would make a Soviet commissar proud. First came the fire marshal inspection notice. Official-looking letterhead, county seal, the works. According to this document, my barn posed an immediate fire hazard to surrounding residential structures and required emergency inspection within 48 hours. Failure to comply would result in county-mandated demolition for public safety. The smell of desperation was stronger than the coffee brewing in my kitchen that morning. I called the real Jefferson County Fire Marshal's office to schedule the inspection. The dispatcher sounded confused. "Sir, we have no record of any complaint or inspection request for your address, and we certainly don't send letters with 48-hour ultimatums." That's when I knew Delilah had crossed the line from harassment into fraud. The mini-twist came faster than I expected. I was showing the fake notice to my neighbor, Margaret Chen, when she squinted at the letterhead and said, "That's the same font my daughter uses for her school projects." Turns out Margaret's sharp teacher eyes spotted something I'd missed. The county seal was slightly pixelated, like it had been copied from a website. So I reverse-searched the letterhead and bingo. Template downloaded from officialdocsplus.com for $12.99. But here's the kicker that made me laugh out loud. The document metadata showed it was created on a computer registered to D. Wainwright Real Estate Services. The woman had literally used her business computer to commit federal fraud. I've seen smarter criminals in Saturday morning cartoons, but wait, it gets better. While researching Delilah's amateur forgery skills, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. Her brother, Marcus Wainwright, owned a commercial development company called Vista Commercial Properties, the same outfit that had been quietly buying up agricultural land throughout Jefferson County for strip mall development. Connect the dots, and suddenly Delilah's obsession with my property made perfect sense. She wasn't just some control freak neighbor. She was the advanced scout for a family business that wanted my land. My counterpunch this time was surgical precision, wrapped in small-town politeness. First, I contacted the real fire marshal and requested an official inspection. Deputy Fire Marshal Rodriguez showed up 2 days later with actual credentials and spent an hour going through my barn with professional equipment. His conclusion? "Mr. Blackwood, this structure exceeds current fire safety standards. Better ventilation and sprinkler system than most new construction I've seen." I got that assessment in writing, officially stamped and notarized, with Rodriguez adding a personal note. Whoever filed that fake inspection request committed a serious crime. Next, I filed a formal complaint with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office about the fraudulent government documents. Deputy Hendricks was becoming my favorite person in law enforcement. The man documented evidence like he was building a case for the Supreme Court. "This is federal mail fraud since she used postal service," he told me, carefully bagging the fake inspection notice. "Plus identity theft for impersonating a government official. She's looking at 5 to 10 years if convicted. Here's a golden nugget that could save your property. Always verify inspector credentials directly with the issuing agency. Unlicensed property inspections can result in federal fraud charges carrying serious prison time." But my favorite part of the counterattack was going nuclear with the family connection. I researched Vista Commercial Properties through the Colorado Secretary of State's business database and found incorporation documents listing Marcus Wainwright as president and Delilah as community development liaison. I posted the smoking gun evidence on the Millbrook Estates Facebook group. Interesting discovery. Our HOA president's brother owns Vista Commercial Properties, which has filed permits for strip mall development on agricultural land throughout Jefferson County. The same family business listed Delilah as their community liaison. Makes you wonder about the real motivation behind these property value concerns, doesn't it? The response was thermonuclear. Within 4 hours, that post had 1,247 comments and 389 shares. Neighbors who'd been supporting Delilah started demanding answers. Margaret Chen organized a petition for Delilah's immediate resignation. Bobby Kowalski started investigating Vista Commercial's other community liaison activities. 3 HOA board members resigned rather than be associated with the scandal. Delilah's retaliation was swift and increasingly desperate. Anonymous complaints flooded county offices about commercial activity in my workshop. My woodworking clients got threatening phone calls about unsafe working conditions and unlicensed contractor liability. Someone even called the IRS claiming I was running an unreported cash business. Each attack was more frantic than the last, but I documented everything with timestamps and recorded calls. I was building a federal case file that would make prosecutors throw a parade. The workshop smelled different now. Instead of just cedar shavings and wood stain, there was the sharp scent of legal documents and the metallic taste of justice getting ready to be served. But Delilah's next move would make her previous attempts look like amateur hour. By May, Delilah had lost 3 board members, half her neighborhood support, and what remained of her sanity. But cornered animals are dangerous, and Delilah Wainwright was about to prove she'd rather burn down the whole subdivision than admit defeat. The escalation started with a certified letter that made my previous violation notices look like love letters. This wasn't from the HOA. This was from Brennan, Walsh & Associates, a Denver law firm with letterheads so fancy it probably cost more to design than my truck was worth. Cease and desist. Immediate demolition of non-conforming agricultural structure required within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in civil action for injunctive relief, property value damages exceeding $500,000, and lien placement on subject property. The letter was signed by someone named Harrison Brennan III, a name so pretentious I half expected it to come with a monocle and a request to speak to my valet. But here's where it got really interesting. The legal document cited 3 specific violations: fire hazard to neighboring properties, zoning violations under Jefferson County Code February 4th, 15, and maintenance of attractive nuisance endangering community welfare. Each violation came with detailed measurements, property surveys, and photographs that looked suspiciously professional. Too professional, as it turned out. The mini twist came when I noticed something off about those property surveys. The measurements didn't match my actual property lines. They were off by exactly 15.7 feet on the eastern boundary. So I pulled my original 1993 survey and compared it line by line. Someone had altered the property boundaries to make my barn appear 50 feet closer to the subdivision than it actually was. We're talking sophisticated document forgery here, complete with fake surveyor stamps, adjusted GPS coordinates, and digital manipulation that would impress a Hollywood effects studio. But that wasn't even the best part. When I called Brennan, Walsh & Associates to verify the letter, the receptionist sounded genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have no record of any client named Wainwright, and Mr. Brennan isn't handling any property disputes in Jefferson County. In fact, he's been retired for 3 years." Delilah had graduated from amateur fraud to professional-grade criminal conspiracy, and she was still terrible at it. My counterpunch this time required bringing in the heavy artillery. I retained Sarah Martinez for full representation. Her $5,000 retainer hurt my bank account, but watching her methodically dismantle Delilah's fake legal documents was better than cable TV. "This isn't harassment anymore," Sarah told me, spreading the forged papers across her conference table like a crime scene investigator. "This is organized fraud involving multiple federal felonies. We're filing a Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit, plus state charges for forgery, mail fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy." But the real nuclear option was what Sarah discovered during her deep dive into my property rights. Those mineral rights were worth way more than I'd calculated. "Ezra, there's active oil and gas leasing happening 2 miles south of your property," Sarah said, pointing to a geological survey map covered in colored dots. "Current market rate is $3,500 per acre annually, plus 18% royalties on production. Your 15 acres of subsurface rights are conservatively worth $2.8 million over a standard 10-year lease. Here's the golden nugget that saved me tens of thousands. Title insurance policies often cover legal defense costs for property disputes. Many homeowners don't realize this benefit exists and can cover attorney fees completely. Armed with this ammunition, I went public in the most spectacular way possible. I organized a Save the Barn community fundraiser at the VFW Hall, complete with barbecue, bluegrass music, and a presentation about property rights that would have made Thomas Jefferson weep with pride. The real showstopper was announcing that any mineral lease revenue would fund a community scholarship program. The response was overwhelming. Over 247 people showed up, including 3 county commissioners, Sheriff Davidson himself, and Channel 9 News from Denver. Margaret Chen brought 6 homemade apple pies. Bobby Kowalski organized a Veteran Honor Guard presentation. Even former Delilah supporters showed up with donation checks and sheepish apologies. the sweet smell of barbecue smoke mixed with crisp mountain air and the satisfying aroma of community solidarity rising like incense. But the knockout punch came when Sarah took the microphone and announced our federal lawsuit filing. She'd brought poster-sized copies of Delilah's forged documents, complete with highlighted fraud sections and side-by-side comparisons. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't neighbor harassment. It's organized criminal conspiracy to defraud Mr. Blackwood of property worth $2.8 million through document forgery and identity theft. The VFW hall went dead silent, then erupted like a volcano. Someone in the back shouted, "Lock her up!" and half the room burst into applause that lasted 3 full minutes. 5 days later, the Denver Post ran a front-page story. HOA president accused of $2.8 million land fraud scheme. The article included photos of my barn, copies of the forged documents, and quotes from a University of Denver legal expert calling it one of the most brazen property fraud cases in Colorado history. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Delilah's real estate license was suspended, pending criminal investigation. Vista Commercial Properties lost 4 major development contracts worth $15 million when the story broke. Marcus Wainwright issued a public statement throwing his sister completely under the bus. But instead of surrendering, Delilah went full scorched earth. The morning after the Post article, I woke to find my mailbox stuffed with anonymous death threats, my security cameras spray-painted black, and fresh tire tracks gouged across my front lawn spelling out "Move." The gloves were officially off, and Delilah was about to make her biggest mistake yet. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in late June, buried in a stack of legal documents that Sarah Martinez had requested from the county recorder's office. I was sipping coffee on my porch, working through property deed research that would have put most people to sleep, when I found the paper that changed everything. It was my grandfather's original 1923 mineral rights deed. Not the summary I'd seen before, but the full document with all its legal attachments and amendments. And there, in faded blue ink on page 7, was a clause that made me nearly drop my coffee mug. Grantor hereby retains in perpetuity all subsurface mineral rights, including but not limited to oil, gas, coal, precious metals, and geological survey access to the entirety of Section 15, Township 3 South, Range 70 West, comprising approximately 640 acres of the original Blackwood Homestead parcel, 640 acres, not just my 15-acre property, the entire section of land that included every single house in Millbrook Estates. My grandfather hadn't just been smart, he'd been brilliant. But the real bombshell was what I found when I cross-referenced that section number with current mineral lease applications. Vista Commercial Properties, Marcus Wainwright's company, had filed a preliminary application for oil and gas exploration rights on the exact same section just 6 months ago. The application listed an estimated lease value of $4.2 million annually, plus 22% royalties on any production. And according to the geological survey attached to their filing, the area was classified as high probability for commercial extraction. Delilah and her brother hadn't just been trying to steal my barn. They'd been trying to steal a potential gold mine worth tens of millions of dollars. The financial implications hit me like a freight train. Every house in Millbrook Estates, every street, every perfectly manicured lawn, all of it sat on mineral rights that belonged to my family. The HOA that had been trying to force me off my own land was built on property where I owned everything underneath their foundations. The power dynamic had just flipped completely upside down, but there was more. Sarah's investigation had uncovered the paper trail connecting Delilah's harassment campaign to her brother's mineral lease application. Internal emails between Vista Commercial and a geological consulting firm showed they'd been planning this extraction project for over 2 years, waiting for the property acquisition phase to be completed. Property acquisition phase. That's what they called stealing my land. The conspiracy was bigger than just neighbor harassment. This was organized fraud designed to force me into selling my property below market value so they could claim mineral rights worth 40 times what they were offering. Delilah's fake violations, forged legal documents, and escalating intimidation. It was all part of a systematic plan to make my life so miserable I'd take whatever lowball offer they eventually made. Here's the legal nugget that turned everything around. Mineral rights often transfer separately from surface rights, and property deeds may contain valuable subsurface assets that owners don't realize they possess. Always research the full chain of title. The beauty of this discovery was that it gave me leverage I'd never dreamed possible. Not only could I stop their harassment permanently, but I could turn the tables in the most spectacular way imaginable. Every monthly HOA fee they'd been collecting, Every fine they'd tried to impose, every meeting where they'd discussed property improvements, all of it was happening on land where I owned the mineral rights, which meant, according to Colorado law, I had legal standing to demand compensation for any surface use that might impact subsurface access, like, say, building an entire subdivision without mineral rights owner approval. The irony was so perfect it hurt. Delilah had spent 8 months trying to force me off my property through legal intimidation. Now, I had grounds to demand millions in compensation from every property owner in her subdivision. But the discovery that really made my day was finding Vista Commercial's internal timeline. According to their project documents, they planned to begin seismic testing in September, just 3 months away. The testing required surface access across the entire mineral rights area, which meant they needed my permission for every single property in Millbrook Estates. Permission they'd never asked for because they assumed they could just steal my land first. Sarah was practically giddy when I showed her the documents. Ezra, this changes everything. They're not just liable for harassment and fraud, they're looking at potential federal RICO charges for organized criminal enterprise. We're talking about a conspiracy to defraud you of property worth tens of millions. The scope of their greed was breathtaking. They'd built an entire subdivision on stolen mineral rights, spent 2 years planning an extraction project, organized a systematic harassment campaign, committed multiple felonies, and never once considered that a small-town electrician might actually know how to read property deeds. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset paint my grandfather's barn red and gold, and realized that 3 generations of Blackwood stubbornness were about to pay off in ways the old man never could have imagined. Tomorrow, I'd start making phone calls. But tonight, I just wanted to savor the moment when David realized he'd been carrying a bazooka the whole time. The next morning, I called Sarah Martinez at 7 a.m. sharp. By 8:30, we were sitting in her office with coffee, legal pads, and a strategy that would make Sun Tzu proud. First things first, Sarah said, spreading geological surveys across her conference table like a general planning an invasion. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Those mineral rights don't just give you leverage, they give you nuclear weapons. She'd already contacted a mineral rights expert who confirmed what Vista Commercial's own documents showed. The subsurface geology beneath Millbrook Estates was sitting on a natural gas formation worth conservatively $47 million over a 20-year extraction period. My 640 acres of mineral rights controlled access to the entire field. But the legal strategy was even more beautiful than the financial windfall. Here's how we play this, Sarah explained, her eyes gleaming like a prosecutor who'd just found the smoking gun. Colorado law requires mineral rights owners to provide reasonable surface access for extraction, but it also requires surface owners to compensate mineral rights owners for any improvements that interfere with subsurface access. Translation: every house, street, and sidewalk in Millbrook Estates was built without mineral rights permission, making the entire subdivision technically liable for trespassing damages. The federal angle was even better. Sarah had contacted a friend at the U.S. Attorney's Office about Vista Commercial's conspiracy. RICO charges were definitely on the table: organized criminal enterprise, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft of federal mineral rights. We're talking about 20 to life territory if they push this to trial. But here's the genius part, Sarah continued. We don't want to destroy the community. We want to save it from these vultures. Our plan was surgical precision wrapped in community benefit. Phase 1 was documentation and alliance building. I'd already been working with Sheriff's Deputy Hendricks to compile evidence of Delilah's harassment campaign. Now we expanded that to include FBI documentation of the mineral rights fraud. Agent Rebecca Torres from the Denver field office was handling the federal case, and she was thorough as a Swiss timepiece. Mr. Blackwood, this is one of the most well-documented fraud cases I've seen, Agent Torres told me during our 3-hour interview. Your security footage, financial records, and paper trail make this a prosecutor's dream. We'll have arrests within 30 days. Phase 2 was financial planning that would benefit everyone except the conspirators. I'd consulted with a mineral lease specialist who helped structure a deal that would protect the community while maximizing revenue. Instead of immediate extraction, we'd negotiate a long-term lease that provided steady income without disrupting surface properties. The numbers were staggering. A properly structured lease would generate approximately $3.2 million annually in royalty payments plus $8.5 million in upfront signing bonuses. Money that could fund a community scholarship program, improve local schools, and still provide my family with generational wealth. Here's the financial nugget that most property owners don't know. Agricultural use exemptions can reduce property taxes by up to 80% even on small acreage, as long as you maintain legitimate farming activities. But my favorite part of the plan was the community organizing strategy. Margaret Chen had been busy rallying neighborhood support, and her retired teacher skills were paying dividends. She'd organized what she called coffee and constitutional rights meetings in her living room, educating neighbors about property rights, HOA limitations, and the fraud conspiracy. Bobby Kowalski took a different approach. As a veteran, he understood tactical planning. He'd been quietly documenting every irregular activity around the subdivision: unusual vehicles, late-night meetings, anyone who looked like they might be conducting surveillance. His military precision was building an intelligence file that would impress the FBI. "These people think they're running some kind of covert operation," Bobby told me, showing me photos of Marcus Wainwright's company vehicles parked in various neighborhood locations. "But they're about as subtle as a helicopter landing in a library." Phase 3 was the legal trap that would end this once and for all. Sarah had prepared a comprehensive federal lawsuit that would be filed simultaneously with criminal charges: civil RICO, mineral rights theft, fraud, conspiracy, harassment, and about 15 other charges that would keep Delilah and Marcus in court for the next decade. But the masterstroke was the timing. We'd coordinate the legal filing with a community meeting where I'd announce the mineral lease benefit program. Instead of the Wainwrights profiting from their crime, the community would benefit from their greed. Agent Torres loved the plan. "Community benefit angles always play well with juries," she said. "Instead of looking like a property dispute, this becomes a story about corporate criminals trying to steal from hardworking families." The third legal nugget that sealed the deal: property owners can request law enforcement presence during disputed inspections, which prevents trespassing claims and ensures any violations are properly documented. By late July, all the pieces were in place. Federal agents were ready to execute search warrants. Sarah had civil lawsuits prepared for immediate filing. Margaret and Bobby had organized community support that included 3 county commissioners and the mayor of nearby Broomfield. The smell of victory was sweeter than fresh coffee and summer morning air combined. But before we could spring our trap, Delilah made one last desperate move that played right into our hands. Apparently, 8 months of failing to steal my property had driven her completely over the edge. She was about to give us the perfect opportunity to catch her red-handed. August brought the kind of Colorado heat that makes even the mountains shimmer, but it was nothing compared to the fire Delilah was about to bring down on herself. The woman had apparently spent July plotting her most desperate gambit yet, and she was about to hand me everything I needed to destroy her completely. It started with sabotage that would have made a mafia enforcer blush. My security cameras began mysteriously malfunctioning, not breaking exactly, but developing convenient blind spots right before suspicious activities. The main power line to my barn got accidentally damaged by a utility truck that had no record of being dispatched to my area. Someone even tried cutting my internet cables, apparently not realizing I'd upgraded to a cellular backup system after the second camera incident. The amateur hour continued with harassment targeting my woodworking business. Anonymous phone calls flooded my clients' voicemails with warnings about unsafe working conditions and unlicensed contractor liability issues. One particularly creative message claimed I was operating without proper insurance and that anyone injured on my property would face personal bankruptcy from lawsuit damages. But my favorite was the fake Yelp reviews. Apparently, my custom cabinet business was now responsible for shoddy workmanship, missed deadlines, and, this one made me laugh out loud, inappropriate political discussions during consultations. The reviews were so obviously fake that Yelp's algorithm flagged them within 48 hours. But not before I'd screenshot everything for evidence. The mini twist came when I discovered who was actually behind the sabotage. My backup security system, the one Delilah didn't know about, caught everything. Hidden trail cameras positioned around my property perimeter recorded Marcus Wainwright himself cutting my internet cables at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The infrared footage showed him clearly. Face visible, license plate readable, bolt cutters in hand like some suburban ninja who'd learned breaking and entering from YouTube videos. But the real smoking gun was the audio. My cellular backup system had caught a phone conversation between Marcus and Delilah where they discussed escalating pressure tactics and making life unbearable until he sells. They literally discussed committing federal crimes while standing on my property, apparently unaware that modern security systems record sound along with video. Here's a golden nugget for anyone dealing with property harassment. Recording conversations may be legal in one-party consent states like Colorado, but always verify local laws before using recordings as evidence in court. My counterpunch was swift and comprehensive. First, I delivered the sabotage evidence directly to Agent Torres at the FBI. Watching her face light up when she saw Marcus Wainwright cutting cables on high-definition video was better than Christmas morning. Mr. Blackwood, this is federal destruction of communications infrastructure. We can add that to the existing conspiracy charges. Next, I filed a restraining order against both Delilah and Marcus, backed by 8 months of documented harassment plus fresh evidence of criminal sabotage. Judge Patricia Coleman granted a temporary order within 24 hours and scheduled a full hearing for the following week. But the pièce de résistance was going public with the criminal evidence. I organized a neighborhood meeting at the community center, ostensibly to discuss property security concerns. Over 180 residents showed up, including Margaret Chen with her famous apple pie, Bobby Kowalski with a PowerPoint presentation that would have impressed the Pentagon, and 3 local news crews who'd been following the story since my mineral rights discovery. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, standing at the podium with a laser pointer and a projection screen, tonight I want to show you exactly what organized crime looks like in suburban Colorado. The room went dead silent as I played the security footage of Marcus cutting my cables, enhanced with timestamps and GPS coordinates. Then came the audio recordings of the conspiracy conversations with transcripts displayed on screen so everyone could follow along. The reaction was nuclear. Gasps, angry murmurs, and then sustained applause that lasted 4 full minutes. Margaret Chen stood up and shouted, "This is our community, not their crime syndicate." Half the room burst into cheers. 3 more HOA board members resigned that night. The subdivision's management company terminated their contract with Millbrook Estates effective immediately. And most satisfying of all, 12 families who'd been supporting Delilah publicly apologized and asked how they could help with legal expenses. But Delilah's response to this humiliation was her most unhinged yet. The morning after the community meeting, I woke up to find my mailbox destroyed by what looked like baseball bat damage. Fresh graffiti covered my barn doors, "Move or else," spray-painted in red letters 3 feet tall. And my apple orchard, 3 generations of family trees, had been deliberately poisoned with herbicide, leaving brown, dying branches that smelled like chemical warfare. Agent Torres called it escalating criminal behavior consistent with organized harassment campaigns. Sarah Martinez called it evidence of conspiracy to intimidate federal witnesses. I called it the stupidest thing Delilah could possibly have done, because now she'd given me everything I needed to spring the final trap. The FBI had enough evidence for federal charges. The civil courts had grounds for millions in damages, and the community was so outraged that Delilah couldn't show her face in public without facing angry neighbors demanding justice. All I had to do now was sit back and wait for her to make the one mistake that would end this forever. I didn't have to wait long. September arrived with the kind of crisp mountain air that usually made me grateful to live in Colorado. But this year, it carried the scent of desperation and the promise of justice finally being served. Delilah was about to make her final, catastrophic mistake. The escalation began with what she probably thought was her masterstroke, a fake emergency county health inspection that would give her accomplices legal cover to search my barn for planted evidence. The documents looked impressive. Official Jefferson County letterhead, health department seals, and urgent language about hazardous materials requiring immediate inspection. According to this fabricated notice, my woodworking shop was allegedly storing unlicensed chemical substances that posed immediate danger to groundwater and residential air quality. The inspection was scheduled for 6 a.m. on September 15th, and failure to provide access would result in county-mandated property seizure for public safety. The smell of bullshit was stronger than my morning coffee. But here's where Delilah's desperation finally overcame her already questionable judgment. Instead of just sending another fake notice, she'd recruited 2 accomplices for what she called an official inspection team. Marcus Wainwright would pose as the lead inspector, while a third conspirator, some guy named Trevor Ash, who apparently owed Marcus money, would serve as the environmental safety specialist. The mini twist that sealed their fate came when I discovered their plan wasn't just to plant evidence. It was to discover hazardous chemicals that would justify immediate property condemnation and forced sale to Vista Commercial Properties for environmental remediation. My trail cameras caught them conducting surveillance runs past my property, timing my usual morning routine. and even testing their fake inspector badges on each other like community theater actors rehearsing a really expensive crime. But the best part was the audio pickup from their planning meeting in Marcus's truck parked right outside my property line. Apparently, they'd decided my barn was the perfect place to find illegal chemical storage because who's going to believe some redneck electrician over county health officials? That conversation alone was worth about 10 years in federal prison. My counterpunch was 8 months in the making, and it was going to be perfect. First, I contacted Agent Torres and Sheriff's Deputy Hendricks to coordinate law enforcement presence during the inspection. Both agencies were eager to catch the conspirators in the act of committing federal crimes on camera. "Mr. Blackwood, this is exactly what we've been waiting for," Agent Torres told me. "Breaking and entering, evidence tampering, impersonating federal officials, conspiracy to commit fraud. We're looking at RICO territory now." But the masterstroke was Sheriff Hendricks's suggestion to be waiting inside the barn when they arrived. "Let them commit the crimes first," he said with a grin that would have made Wyatt Earp proud. "Then we've got them dead to rights on federal charges." Here's the legal nugget that made this trap possible. Property owners can request law enforcement presence during disputed inspections, and any attempt to enter without proper authorization constitutes criminal trespassing regardless of fake credentials. The setup was military precision. Sheriff Hendricks would be positioned inside the barn with full recording equipment. Agent Torres and 2 FBI agents would be stationed in unmarked vehicles with visual confirmation of the property. I'd be in my farmhouse with a clear view of the barn and a direct radio link to all law enforcement. Sarah Martinez had civil lawsuit papers ready for immediate filing, including emergency injunctions that would freeze all Wainwright assets pending federal investigation. Margaret Chen organized neighborhood witnesses positioned at strategic locations with their own cameras. Bobby Kowalski coordinated with local media to ensure maximum coverage of the arrests. The trap was perfect, the bait was irresistible, and Delilah was about to walk straight into it. The night before the fake inspection, I sat on my porch listening to the sounds of preparation echoing across the valley. Radio checks between law enforcement positions. The distant hum of news vans positioning themselves just outside the property perimeter. The soft click of camera equipment being tested and retested. Even the autumn air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for justice to finally be served. At 5:30 a.m. on September 15th, I watched through my kitchen window as 3 figures in matching windbreakers approached my barn. Marcus Wainwright carried a clipboard and what looked like official inspection equipment. Trevor Ash had a bag full of what I assumed were the chemicals they planned to discover, and Delilah herself walked behind them like a general inspecting her troops before the final battle. They had bolt cutters, evidence bags, fake inspector badges, and absolute confidence that they were about to win this 8-month war. What they didn't have was any idea that Sheriff Hendricks was sitting inside my barn with his morning coffee, recording equipment, and federal backup, waiting for them to commit enough felonies to put them away for the next 20 years. The barn door was unlocked, just as they'd expected. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating their target perfectly. And when Marcus Wainwright pushed that weathered wooden door open, expecting to find an empty workshop ripe for evidence planting, he instead found himself face to face with the full force of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The look on their faces was worth 8 months of harassment, fake legal documents, and criminal conspiracy charges. Justice was about to be served with a side of federal prison time. The barn door creaked open at exactly 5:47 a.m., and Marcus Wainwright stepped into what he thought would be his moment of triumph. Instead, he walked straight into the perfectly orchestrated downfall of an 8-month criminal conspiracy. Sheriff Hendricks was sitting on a hay bale in the center of the barn, steam rising from his coffee mug in the crisp morning air, badge catching the early sunlight streaming through the windows. His radio crackled to life as FBI agents moved into position around the property perimeter. "Good morning, folks," Sheriff Hendricks said, his voice carrying that particular tone of law enforcement satisfaction. "I don't suppose you have actual inspection warrants for this visit?" The silence was deafening. Marcus dropped his clipboard. Trevor Ash froze with a bag of chemicals halfway out of his backpack, evidence he'd been planning to plant throughout my workshop. And Delilah, standing in the doorway with her mouth hanging open like a fish, looked like she'd just watched her entire world collapse in real time. "Marcus Wainwright, Delilah Wainwright, Trevor Ash," Sheriff Hendricks continued, standing up and setting down his coffee with deliberate precision. "You're under arrest for criminal trespassing, conspiracy to commit fraud, impersonating government officials, and attempted evidence tampering. That's when Agent Torres stepped through the side door with 2 additional FBI agents, all wearing tactical gear and expressions that meant business. And federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights under Section 1983, and RICO violations for organized criminal enterprise. The Miranda rights recitation was music to my ears, echoing across the valley as 3 generations of Blackwood stubbornness finally got the justice they deserved. But the real show was just beginning. By 7 a.m., my property looked like the set of a crime drama. FBI evidence teams photographed everything while sheriff's deputies secured the scene. News crews from Denver had arrived with satellite trucks and cameras that captured every moment of the arrests. Margaret Chen organized neighbors to provide witness statements, while Bobby Kowalski coordinated crowd control with military efficiency. The media presence was overwhelming. Channel 9 News, Channel 7, the Denver Post, and even a crew from a national network that had been following property rights stories. Reporter Jessica Walsh from Channel 9 conducted a live broadcast from my front porch while federal agents processed evidence in the background. This is a developing story of alleged criminal conspiracy involving millions of dollars in mineral rights fraud, Walsh reported to the camera. What began as neighbor harassment has evolved into federal RICO charges against a real estate development family accused of organizing an 8-month campaign to steal property worth nearly $3 million. But my mic drop moment came when Sarah Martinez arrived with a stack of legal documents and called an impromptu press conference right there on my front lawn. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced to the assembled crowd of neighbors, reporters, and law enforcement, "today's arrests represent the culmination of the most well-documented property fraud case in Colorado history. The evidence we'll be presenting in federal court shows a systematic conspiracy to steal Mr. Blackwood's mineral rights through harassment, document forgery, and criminal intimidation." She held up blown-up copies of the forged inspection notices, fake legal documents, and security footage of Marcus cutting my cables. What we have here isn't just neighbor harassment, it's organized crime disguised as homeowner association enforcement. The crowd of neighbors erupted in applause. Someone shouted, "About time!" and half the subdivision cheered. Margaret Chen wiped tears from her eyes while Bobby Kowalski saluted like justice had just been served with full military honors. But the moment that made 8 months of harassment worth it came when I stepped up to the microphone cluster that had appeared on my lawn. 8 months ago, Delilah Wainwright told me I didn't belong in this community, I said, looking directly at the news cameras. Today, I want everyone to know that the mineral lease revenue from this property will fund a scholarship program for local students, support our volunteer fire department, and help establish a community conservation fund. This land has been in my family for 100 years, and it's going to benefit this community for the next 100. The applause was thunderous. Neighbors who'd been divided by Delilah's campaign united in support of community benefit over corporate greed. 3 county commissioners who'd shown up for the press conference publicly endorsed the scholarship program. Even the mayor of nearby Louisville announced the city's support for property rights protection. Here's the final legal nugget that sealed their fate. Criminal trespassing charges apply to anyone entering private property without permission, even if they claim official authority. No residential association or fake government position overrides basic property rights. The financial consequences were immediate and devastating. Vista Commercial Properties lost their development contracts worth $23 million when news of the arrests broke. Delilah's real estate license was permanently revoked. Marcus faced federal charges carrying 20 to life sentences. Trevor Ash agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. But the community impact was even more satisfying. The HOA was officially dissolved by emergency vote within 48 hours. Property owners organized a new voluntary association focused on community benefit rather than corporate control. And my barn, the center of 8 months of harassment, became a symbol of property rights resistance that inspired similar cases across Colorado. As the media crews packed up their equipment and federal agents finished processing evidence, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The smell of autumn air mixed with the sweet scent of justice finally served. Delilah Wainwright had spent 8 months trying to steal my family's legacy. Instead, she'd given me the perfect opportunity to protect it forever while benefiting the entire community. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting criminals destroy themselves while you document everything for federal prosecutors. 6 months later, the courtroom victories were even sweeter than I'd imagined. Delilah received 18 months in federal prison plus 5 years probation for mail fraud and conspiracy charges. Marcus got 4 years for RICO violations and was ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. Trevor Ash testified against both of them and got off with community service, which he's serving by helping maintain the community garden we built where the HOA office used to be. The financial resolution exceeded every expectation. The mineral lease auction drew 12 bidders from across the energy sector, ultimately settling with Rocky Mountain Energy Partners for a 20-year deal worth $3.8 million annually plus 24% production royalties. My attorney Sarah Martinez structured the contract to protect surface properties while maximizing community benefit, proving that good legal work pays dividends for generations. But the real victory was what we did with that money. The Blackwood Community Foundation launched in March with a $500,000 endowment for local scholarships. So far, we've funded college tuition for 8 students from Jefferson County, including Margaret Chen's granddaughter who's studying environmental law at CU Boulder. Bobby Kowalski suggested we add a veteran education program, which now provides trade school funding for military families transitioning to civilian careers. The annual Barn Festival has become a celebration of property rights and community independence that draws over 2,000 people each September. Local musicians perform on a stage built from reclaimed wood from my grandfather's original fence posts. Food vendors donate profits to the scholarship fund. Kids learn about agriculture, property rights, and why standing up to bullies, whether they're playground tyrants or corrupt HOA presidents, matters for democracy. My property itself has become something special. The barn now houses a woodworking cooperative where neighbors can learn traditional crafts while contributing to community projects. The apple orchard, replanted after Delilah's herbicide attack, produces enough fruit for a farmer's market that funds local school programs. And the farmhouse hosts constitutional coffee meetings every Saturday morning, where Margaret Chen teaches property rights law to anyone interested in protecting their homes. The health benefits of winning this fight were immediate and lasting. The stress-related insomnia disappeared. My blood pressure returned to normal. Even my woodworking improved. Turns out creativity flows better when you're not constantly watching for the next harassment campaign. I've completed commissions for 3 Denver restaurants and a custom kitchen that got featured in Colorado Homes magazine. More importantly, the community bonds forged during this fight created lasting friendships. Margaret Chen and her husband join me for dinner every Sunday. Bobby Kowalski and I built a workshop edition where he teaches veteran carpentry skills. Even former Delilah supporters like the Johnson family have become close neighbors who help with harvest season and community projects. The legal precedent established by our case has inspired property owners across Colorado. Sarah Martinez has handled 12 similar cases in the past year, all citing Blackwood v. Wainwright as precedent for fighting HOA overreach. The Colorado legislature passed new oversight requirements for homeowner associations, including mandatory disclosure of any conflicts of interest and criminal background checks for board members. Sheriff's Deputy Hendricks, who became Sheriff Hendricks after the November election, uses our case as a training example for property rights enforcement. Agent Torres received a commendation from the FBI director for her thorough investigation. And 3 law schools now include our case in their property rights curricula as an example of effective legal strategy combined with community organizing. But my grandfather's legacy lives on in ways that matter most. The land stays in our family, protected by conservation easements that ensure it can never be developed for commercial use. The mineral rights provide generational wealth while funding community programs that strengthen rural Colorado. And the barn still stands as a symbol that ordinary people can defeat corporate greed when they're armed with knowledge, patience, and really good legal representation. The final takeaway that summarizes everything: document every violation, research your property rights thoroughly, and never underestimate the power of community support when fighting institutional bullies. Last week, I received a letter from a family in Texas facing similar HOA harassment. They'd read about our case online and wanted advice for protecting their ranch from a subdivision development scheme. I spent 2 hours on the phone with them, sharing contact information for property rights attorneys and explaining how to document harassment for federal investigation. Because that's what this fight was really about, proving that families with deep roots and strong principles can protect their heritage from corporate predators who think money and legal intimidation can overcome a century of hard work and community ties. Every morning, I still sit on my porch with coffee, listening to meadowlarks sing over the distant hum of Highway 36. But now there are also sounds of children playing in the community garden, power tools from the cooperative workshop, and occasional laughter from Saturday's constitutional coffee meetings. The property that Delilah tried to steal has become the heart of a community that values independence, mutual aid, and standing up for what's right. Your turn. Have you faced HOA harassment or property rights violations? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help other families protect their homes. And if this story inspired you to research your own property rights, hit that subscribe button for more victory stories about ordinary people defeating corporate bullies. Next week, I'll tell you about the retired librarian in Kansas who used an 1880s railroad easement to stop a casino development and save her entire town. Because sometimes the best weapons against modern greed are very old laws and very determined people who know how to use them.